Hello everyone, my name is Conrad Bafia and I'm a sales engineer here at Matillion, and I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so walking you through the Data Productivity Cloud and how my account executive and I have fought the challenges of writer's block when it comes to writing outreach emails. So being a sales engineer and being part of the go-to-market team, a lot of times we have to do outreach activities, some of which are including, writing emails to potential prospects or circling back with potential customers. And a lot of times that can be a bit more difficult than it seems. I'm sure you've been there before. You sat down, you're going to write an email, and then you try to get going, and you just can't figure out the right way to start or how to put it all together, or it doesn't sound right. And before you know it, 10, 20, 30, maybe an hour has passed, and you haven't got much done. And how can we break that trend, and how can we use things like generative AI and Matillion's Data Productivity Cloud to help break those barriers and really make you a lot more effective when it comes to things like this, as well as being a lot more tactical and targeted with your responses to potential prospects and customers. So without further ado, let's jump in. So, do you need a productivity overhaul? Based on market research from Salesforce, I would say most sales folks or people that are going to market or marketing or any interact in any sort of way probably need a productivity boost these days. We have a lot of inputs coming in, emails, calls, distractions, and a lot of times that ends up being we don't do kind of the primary part of our job, right? Which is in this case is sales folks spend time selling. Based on this research, about 30% of our time is only spent selling, meaning that we spend a lot of time doing other activities, and maybe we're not as effective as we can be with them because of things like writer's block. So for the folks that don't know what writer's block is, it's essentially that kind of mental block where you just can't get started. You can't get in the groove. You don't know what to say. Nothing sounds right. It's really just kind of this internal debate or quarrel that you can't seem to get out of. And a lot of times what really helps is either another perspective, you read something, or in this case, we use generative AI, right? We're going to go through this from an angle of, I know what my emails sound like. I know what I want them to say, but I can't really put it together. So this is going to be a great use case for using an LLM to generate perhaps a starting point. So what we're going to do here is just spend a few minutes in the DPC, the Data Productivity Cloud from Matillion. We're going to feed it some data that we've pre-populated into a Google Sheet. And that data is I'll show it to you, but it's basically just hey, I've got 2 companies I'm targeting. I see they have some job openings out there, and maybe those are going to be the basis of what I want to say to these prospects, right? If they're hiring for a certain talent, and that appeals to me as to what we can offer to them, maybe that's something I want to intertwine into my email. It kind of shows that I've done my due diligence, I've done my homework, which I have, right? I've gone through and identified these things and compiled them. But then stitching it all together, keeping it all in line, that's where we really get the gains of AI and generative AI. So let's do that, right? We're going to do that. And how can this become more productive? Well, based on our quick analysis of if we were to use this internally at Matillion or any other company, taking an average of, let's say, average enterprise sales rep makes about $50 an hour on average. You have a team about, say, 15 reps, and they spend only 1 hour a day on average writing emails. If you did that math, that'll equate to at least $195,000 and saves expenses to the bottom line, where those folks can be spent time selling versus sitting there maybe writing an email or two because of distractions and whatnot. So there is some monetary gain to gain from this, as well as, most importantly, productivity gains, right? You'll see after we go through this exercise that you may find yourself a little bit blown away as to how quickly and efficiently you can write out really unique emails, and really kind of break that writer's block and give your sales teams, your marketing teams, the kickstart that they need to really write those great emails and hopefully see great responses in return. So without further ado, let's just jump in. One last thing, there are some prerequisites, of course, and sorry to bounce out of the slides. You will need a Matillion Hub account. That is where the Data Productivity Club lives. You will need a Snowflake account for this exercise. You will need either an OpenAI, which is the one I'll use, ChatGPT, or Amazon Bedrock or Azure AI. We have components for all these, but you will need a subscription to interact with their API. So you're going to need the credentials for that, as well as obviously active credits on that account, because we will be interacting with that interface live. And last but not least, I've stored this data in Google Sheets. It's simpler for me, but you will need a source of data to reference for the AI LLM, right? You're going to want some input for the LLM to use. So storing that in a place like Google Sheets is where we'll begin. So just give you a quick idea of what the data I've populated into this Google Sheet is. I've taken some, fake names, of course. I wouldn't want to use real names here. Take some fake names, assign some fake titles, fake company names. In this case, I'm Prospecting Company LLC and Best Biz LLC. I've got the, some general metrics that, most marketing, go-to-market folks will have information to this anyways, and relevant job opening descriptions. So if they had an opening, I've taken that excerpt from their hiring website and I've pasted it here because there's going to be relevant information as like what skills they're after, what are they seeking from their desired candidates. And I want to make sure that, those things are tied into the email because, it's going to be relevant to what I want to say. So we store this Google Sheet in my Google account. And let's look at what our desired end goal is here. So you'll see here, in order for us to reference the Google Sheets data, we're going to first bring that Google Sheets data into Snowflake, and then as part of our AI prompt, this is where we'll actually generate the new table with the desired email template or starting point. It'll read from that newly created Google Sheets data that now exists in Snowflake, and it'll generate the output. So this is kind of the three-step process, or two-step process, I should say. But what I wanted to show you is how easy it is to get it done. So I'll actually recreate my work here alongside this, so that way you guys can see what that all looks like. So let's jump in. So the first thing we want to do here is create a new orchestration pipeline. So the orchestration pipeline is the E and the L of the ELT paradigm. It's here where you can load data and kind of orchestrate your entire pipeline. But in this case, let's call this the Gen AI example emails. Maybe that's not the greatest name, but that's what I'll call it. So now I got a blank canvas, and the first thing I mentioned before is I want to add a Google Sheets input, right? That data that I just showed you in the previous tab lives in Google Sheets. So the first step that I'm going to do here is configure that component. So before this component can run, as you can see, as I validated it, it needs to have a couple things. First thing, to authenticate. Now I've gone ahead and did the OAuth authentication. If you ever use Google authentication, it's just pretty straightforward, takes 2 seconds. The next is going to be the spreadsheet name. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that from my Google Sheet. Now, once it parses the name, I should have a data source. So now it's reading the Google Sheet. And in this outreach email sheet, I have a tab called data. You can see that here. So I'll go, that's the data that I want to pull in. And then as I do that, it's going to ask me, well, what do you want to pull from the sheet itself? Well, I want to pull in all the relevant information. Maybe I'll up my limit to 1,000. I don't have that many rows, but I kind of just do that by de facto standard. Now I do have defaults set already on my environment, meaning that, for the folks that maybe are newer to Matillion or haven't used the DBC before, our components not only query the data, but they also place the data directly into Snowflake. So you're going to see parameters around like warehouse, database, and schema, meaning where do you want to put this data in Snowflake? I have defaults set, but just to prove that this is all brand new, I'm not doing anything behind the scenes, I have created a brand new schema, and notice how it's populating the list of values for me. I've created a brand new schema in Snowflake. I'll even prove it to you guys here. If I pop over into my Snowflake environment, I refresh, you will see that within my database, the DBC demo is indeed empty. I don't have any objects here, so we're starting net new just to show how that looks. So I'm going to override the default here because I did not set it to the DBC demo, but nonetheless, it's another feature, right? I can pick and choose where I want to put this data, in this case DBC demo, and what do I want to call this Google Sheet data? Well, maybe I'll call it stage G Sheets, outreach, prospects. So what this will do is once this runs, I'll go ahead and just change one last thing here to use internal staging for loading the data through. You see now that we've satisfied what the Google Sheet should look like. It's going to create a new table when I run it that looks something like this when I run it through. So let's go ahead and run that through and validate that it exists. So I'll go ahead and hit run. And what we'll see is when this is complete, if we go back to Snowflake, we've now pulled data from an external source pretty easily over into Snowflake. So you see that it's done. Let's go ahead and refresh here. You see now that we have a table, and what do you know? It's the Stage G Sheets Outreach Prospects, and you could see that there is actual data in there as well. So excellent. First step of our journey is complete. We have our data in Snowflake. Let's actually achieve what we want to achieve. In this case, I need to write email. I don't need to necessarily load data from G Sheets. So what we're going to do next is use our AI components. Now, you can see here that we have multiple options: OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, and Amazon Bedrock. In this case, I have an account with ChatGPT for OpenAI. Excuse me. So what I'll go ahead is first satisfy what properties are required. So in this case, what model do I want to use? Well, ChatGPT 4 is the latest model. It's kind of the latest and greatest. Which API key do you want? Now, I did already store my key in advance. It's just something that you do once. Pretty straightforward. We can always have a video to cover how you do that, but it's basically storing your key securely. And then the next is going to be, well, okay, much like we saw in the Google Sheets, we have to specify where do we want to put our, where do we want to source our data from. So in this case, I sourced the data in this G Sheet into a different schema called DPC demo, right? So now I'm going to say from DPC demo, take this newly loaded G Sheets data set. What's my key on there? Well, I don't really have a unique key. I just have the row ID. I don't have any dupes. If you had, of course, better data set, you can choose a real key, but nonetheless, that's that. And then the next requirement is inputs. So we can choose all, we can choose none. I do want to include all of the relevant information. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of just churn through these quickly. Company email, full name. What else are we missing here? Job description, openings, title, and technology reference. Now you could choose different descriptive names if you want to reference that for the LM. If there was maybe some unique ID, but you said, hey, this hash is social security or something. I don't know, whatever it is. But in this case, I don't have anything unique. Although the columns are pretty self-explanatory. Now, the last property here is going to be, okay, well, where do you want the output to go? Much like last time, I did want to put it into a unique place. In this case, a brand new schema called DPC demo, and this will be our OpenAI email template. Maybe email prospecting. And then to create table options, I'll just quickly make it replace so that way we can run it multiple times. But nonetheless, so this, if I ran it, really wouldn't do much good for us. The reason for that is we didn't give it any context, right? As it stands right now, the component is configured and will run, but what it'll do is just provide the LLM the inputs, and the LLM will just try to make sense of what you gave it. So a lot of times, and I would say vast majority of times, we are going to leverage the user context for the prompt, right? You're going to want to tell the LLM, hey, this is what I want you to do, this information I'm giving you, this is the tone I want you to use, the limits I want you to set, and it's here that we can, it's a free text field, we can type what we'd like to tell the LLM alongside the data that it's going to read from Snowflake. So rather than bore you guys to death, watch me type, what I'm going to do is cheat a little bit and just take the prompt that my rep and I, Ted, have put together. We'll quickly scan through what we wrote in there. But we'll go back in here to our newly refined pipeline and paste in the context. Now, I am not an LLM expert. I can't tell you goods or bads or what's effective or not with LLM prompting. I would leave that to the experts and for your own research. But just some key things that I want to point out, like, with emails, we do want to keep it short. The brevity is important. So like here we said, keep your responses between 75 to 150 words. Different things like task, what you want to do. Well, I want you to write a sales email from an account executive to a prospect. What style and tone? Maybe we included a sample of what a real email that Ted wrote before, so it has an idea of what kind of tone and how he approaches writing emails, and some other instructions for the LLM. And once you provide that for the LLM, well, that's it. You could sample the results, but I'm more of a let's shoot from the hip. Let's run it through. So I'll give one quick scan through, just make sure it all looks the same. Like I didn't change any of the default parameters for the temperature or anything like that. You have these parameters available for you, but I am using OpenAI. Everything here looks good. Let's give it a go, huh? Let's go ahead and hit run. So while this is doing its thing, just a quick recap of what we accomplished, right? So within, it looks now we're about 15 minutes in. Within 5 minutes or 6 minutes working in this environment, we were able to successfully read data from a Google Sheets and pull it over into Snowflake. We were able to then take that as a starting point for the next step in our operation, which was connecting to, OpenAI, ChatGPT 4 model. We were able to provide it some context of what we want the AI model to do, and then within about a minute, not even, about 45 seconds, we should see some new information. So once again, let's go ahead and refresh, see if we see some data. Look at our data preview, and you can see we have what the AI model replied with. So let's have a look, right? So of course we can do a transformation afterwards to join the ID back to the ID of the Google Sheets to understand what that looks like. But let's go ahead and just query this data. So what was that email? It was called OpenAI template. What are we missing here? I probably have to refresh my. This is standard user errors. Let's do, I think let's quote this. There we are. And there we are. So we have some data. So let's take a quick look at what one of these emails look like. So you can see it provides us a subject as we instructed it to do so. We've got some nice text here talking about company LLCs where this what now works at, provides some information around the DPC and what it can do for your team. And we just toggle through a bit more. You can see that each one of these that it's created has very unique sense of tone, very unique sense of structure. It's not your typical templated email where you just swap in names and everyone knows pretty quickly that it's not a unique email for them. This really will help you generate a great email. Now, there are, of course, some things you should keep in mind, right? I am by no means advocating that you should just take this, blindly copy and paste it and send it out. The goal here was to break the writer's block, right? The goal here was give you that starting boost and then have your folks that are on the go-to-market team, marketing, whoever else is, would be using a flow like this to give them that head start to say, oh, this is a great start. However, might tweak this, might tweak that. Make sure the person is involved, right? Their LLMs are prone to things like hallucination and things like that. So be the most, cognizant as you can be as far as any pitfalls or risks that come along with it. But nonetheless, I think hopefully you can see that this is only on a subset of 8 records. If you had hundreds of rows, of unique things of prospects you want to reach out across an enterprise, it would operate the same way. I hope that gives you a good understanding of how easy and quick you can get really something valuable back to your go-to-market teams and other dependent departments. But the last thing I did want to show you is, while this does successfully generated what we were looking to do, one last thing I did want to show you is, our ability to also use AI within our platform to generate some new nodes, right? So, good code is documented code. And what you can see here is now, based on the inputs that we've provided on the canvas, the model, or so the AI embedded into Matillion's data productivity cloud, was able to generate a nice little note for us here to describe what's going on in the pipeline. So that's just a nice little icing on the cake, so to say. But hope you've enjoyed that. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and look to hear from you soon. Take care. Bye.